whenever I tell people too, and they say, "Oh, I don't know if I could be a photographer," I just ask them, "Have you ever spent more than 2 or 3 seconds looking at one thing?" Like you really got to challenge yourself. When people say that they're not a photographer or couldn't do it, that's just the way that they're thinking about themselves. They're doubting themselves before they've started.
Welcome to the Flying Fruit Bowl, a platform dedicated to the discussion and exploration of art and the creative process. I'm your host, Ernest, and today's episode is the first part of a two-part conversation with the amazing photographer, Ryan Taylor. Residing in Canada, Ryan's work explores his inner emotions and often depicts desolate places that tap into the universal themes of isolation, uncanniness, and nostalgia. I had a great time talking to Ryan about his amazing work, and I really hope you enjoyed listening to this conversation too. Let's start where I start with everybody, is just tell us a bit about yourself and how you became a photographer.
Yeah, so I got interested in about 2018. I followed a few photographers, didn't actually shoot anything. And then I started taking just random iPhone photos and downloaded the Lightroom app on my phone and just had fun kind of editing a bit. It wasn't like serious, but 2020, I finally got the money together and I bought an M100, which is not the best camera in the world. But it was a starter camera. I was able to justify it because finances were kind of what held me back. And it was $500. I used it for my job. So it was very easy. I could write it off. But I switched to film like a month after because there was no viewfinder on that camera. And my only other options were to spend hundreds of dollars on another digital camera with a viewfinder or spend $20 on a film camera that I could use after that.
See, that's interesting because I feel like one thing we don't actually think about is actually how expensive photography can be as just even as a hobby, let alone if you're doing it for a career.
Yeah, exactly. It's not cheap at all. And it's the reason I still use film. I mean, coming up with cash up front, there's a lot of things that you need cash up front for in society these days. So it's kind of hard to throw thousands God, even a vacation, I wouldn't be able to throw thousands at right now.
Yeah, it's like a sacrifice you have to make financially in terms of like what you can afford to do and what you can't afford to do. And it's kind of interesting that you said that finances held you back because I speak to a lot of, especially photographers, where maybe their finances aren't particularly great, but they still create work. And it's kind of like, it's interesting that even though you may not have the means to do things, you still create with what you have. And I really appreciate that DIY kind of attitude and kind of like, how has that kind of helped you so far in, kind of the work you've created?
Yeah, so film works well for me because of how I'm paid and how I'm budgeting and how I do my finances. So paying money every now and then for film costs is a lot more palatable for me. It's an easier thing to manage than spending thousands of dollars in any one month. If digital cameras gave you an option to have like a 1 or 2% financing and stretch it 2 to 3 years, I'd probably be doing that instead. But because of that, it forced me to do film, which has probably been a good thing because film has forced me to kind of learn more about photography than I was learning with digital. A lot of people I was listening to a few of your podcasts say that digital is better for beginners. I mean, I don't know if that's necessarily something I agree with because you can use your phone all the time. But I find, if you get one of these digital cameras, you're not going to be forced to learn about, focusing, aperture, exposure, anything like that. And with film, you don't really have a choice. You get one roll back and you're like, shoot, I gotta go back to the drawing board now.
See, that's actually a really interesting way of looking at it because I'm definitely one of those people that I always say like digital is quote unquote easier. It's it takes a lot of the guesswork out of photography, which can be a good or bad thing depending on the way you're approaching it. But if you could afford a digital camera, would you buy one?
Absolutely. So I do plan to buy one within the next 2 to 3 years once my finances balance out. I'm sinking basically more money than I've ever had into a house. This is part of the thing I'm renovating.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Like, again, it comes back to priorities. Like if you've got a house to renovate, it's going to be a little bit more important than you buying a camera. Your priorities, are going to be in a different place. So, and not just that, like what you'll get out of having renovated the house is going to be a very different thing to buying a camera,
Yeah, it'll free up a lot of cash once you can do a thing, you refinance a house, you pull the equity out. So I'll be able to do that pretty soon. And with that, I plan to buy I want one of the Fuji medium format cameras. So I'm looking at, I think it's the GFS or the GFX.
I think it's kind of interesting because I feel like a lot of people normally shoot digital because it's more. I think, in my opinion, like, I think film is actually more of is kind of more financially challenging because you have to spend so much money on film. Whereas in digital, it's just a one upfront cost. Whereas in film, it's a constant cost, no matter how much you shoot.
I think it depends what someone's doing and what they're shooting. So I like medium format because I get more depth of field choices, and it gives more like a 3D aspect to the photos, and it's a challenge. It's definitely I got my first RB67 rollback, and that was very very humbling. Um, but it's something I want to do, especially with portraiture. It gives you more options, and to get started with medium format, 1,500 bucks will get you a Pentax 6.7 with a 105 2.8, which is an insanely good lens and setup. And each roll of film probably going to cost me 11 bucks, and then I go and get it. Even if I get the most high end scans I can get, that's going to be like under 40 bucks to do that. So $50 for every 10 photos sounds like a lot, but how many photos do you actually post from a shoot when you shoot digital?
That's
Like
true.
I'd have to take a lot of photos to be
That's
able to
true.
justify that bridge and gap.
But then I guess not that this is which is better, one's better than the other, but I guess the offset to that would be that you can afford to shoot that many images on digital. You can afford to have thousands and thousands of images backed up on a hard drive and not have to worry
Exactly.
about the cost of that because it's there, it's convenient.
I would have to buy a new computer and a new hard drive if I had bought those cameras too. I can't.
Yes.
I
So
almost broke the
yeah.
bank buying this MacBook Air.
Say that is actually really funny you should say that because I'm always like, oh, I should upgrade my gear. And it's like I have a computer that's 10 years old now. And it runs it's like every time I switch it on, it sounds it's about to overheat. But it's just like I can't justify spending more money on something when I have something that works. And it's kind of like we don't really think about it's not just about the cost is not just the camera, it's everything else that comes with that. It's making sure you've got the equipment to use that camera, to hook that camera up, to the tripod you need to go out, the bag you need to take it in, the insurance you need to walk around in the streets at night, stuff like that. We don't think about the extra costs that are involved. That's a really good point, actually. It's something to think about, I think, because it's very easy to forget that you buy a camera, yeah, sure, that's cool, but you're not just buying a camera. It's not just a one item.
Exactly. I mean, I don't like spending a lot of money on things that someone might try and steal. I always joke that if someone broke into my house, you'd pick probably the worst house to break into because nothing in here is worth anything. Like my most expensive camera, I think it's maybe worth 300 bucks at best. Uh, and it's just, I mean, God, if someone tried to rob me for it, I would just say, all right, let me just rewind my film. Like it's a Canon program, like have it, like you maybe get 100 bucks locally.
I see. I like that kind of mindset, or I like that kind of idea of like you don't have to have the best of the best, and you don't have to spend thousands of pounds on things because at the end of the day, like if you can't afford it, don't buy it. That's the way I've always been. I've always been raised that way, and this is the way I live. It's like if you can't afford it, don't buy it. And even if you can afford it, doesn't mean you should buy it. Doesn't mean you need it just because you can afford it. And I think it's kind of I'm very kind of interested because you've said about the fact you shoot film because it kind of just says to me that like rather than it be about the gear and it be about having the best thing ever, you're using what you have. Like, and it's more important for you to have the ability to create great work than it is for you to because like there's so many photographers you see or quote unquote content creators if you want to have that conversation later that have the best gear. They have like a Canon Mark, is it 5 that's out now, whatever it's out now, and they have £3,000 cameras and they have like the best lenses, but their work is kind of still mediocre. They're just shooting stuff everybody else shoots. It doesn't really say anything, or there's no depth to it. But they have the equipment. Yeah, we have somebody like yourself, or somebody like so many of the photographers I talk to, whose work, for me at least personally, speaks to me a lot more. Yet you don't necessarily have the best gear. You don't have to have the most expensive equipment in the world to create great images. It's about your eye.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'd probably shoot digital if I could afford digital, but it's just too much of a gap that I can't get
Yeah.
past. And yeah, I think you're right too. A lot of the people that rely a lot on the gear, it kind of shows in their work. I mean, one of my friends has really, really good gear, but like he makes use of that gear. And it's definitely not a very common occurrence where people will, I don't know. I mean, I would even say his skill set is probably passing his gear, and he's got like that fancy Canon camera, like the R whatever, with the I don't know, I think it's a 200 millimeter 2.8. I don't know, and I'd say he's probably already outgrown it, but I don't think most people would even make use of that properly.
See, that's also a very good point. Like, just because you have the equipment doesn't mean you know what you're going to do with it. And not just that, like, it's, and I don't want to like I'm hating on people who have the best gear because I'm not hating on that at all. I think if people can afford it, buy it. If you want to buy it, if you want to invest in that, go ahead. But it's important that you are able to actually understand what you like about the work you create, not just create work to create work, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know.
Exactly.
There's something that when I see somebody with like the fanciest, like I know I went to university to study a photography degree.
Okay.
And when I did, people were buying the latest camera that was out for like £3,000 during their degree. And it's like, you're buying the best gear, but you don't have the best eye. Like, train your eye first before you pick up the best camera. Because without a good eye, without knowing what you actually want to shoot, without kind of knowing who you are as an artist, you're not going to make the best use of that gear. That gear is just going to be good gear. Good gear, bad image,
Yeah, exactly. It's a good point. And especially then, I mean, you're probably doing some film in college, university, I imagine.
A little, only a slight bit.
Yeah. So if trying to figure out, yeah, I imagine too, like even back like before us, learning to do photography in like the 80s. If someone had access to the cameras back then, I mean, I just bought a Mamiya RB67. I'm not going to sell it, but it's definitely, I mean, it's got limitations for what I like to use. So I mean, I can't imagine learning on an expensive camera and then deciding you need a different one.
And not just that, I think the problem with gear, even this is not meant to be about conversation heading very much towards gear, but that's cool. But it's like the problem also with gear is that once you buy the latest thing, you want the next thing. And it's like, at what point do you appreciate and respect the fact you have something to create with? And that's better than having nothing to create with.
Exactly, exactly. I think that gets lost in the whole debate of film versus digital. Everyone makes it about cost, but I mean, there's a reason the subscription-based model businesses do well these days.
Yeah.
It's more palatable and it's easier for someone with a thin margin every month to throw $100 at film than upgrade their $1,000 digital setup every 2 to 3 years.
But I also think without being very cynical, I also think it's a very convenient way for companies to keep people having to come back. If I think about something like Adobe Photoshop, for instance, or Lightroom, it's like it was so much better back in the day when you could just buy it outright and you owned it because yes, it was an expense, but you had it. Nowadays, you have to pay for it all the time. There's no cut-off point at which you just don't need it anymore and you become reliant upon it, which is, a great business model, but it's also a bit, I don't know, even though I use it, I have Lightroom, I did have Photoshop, which I need to buy a new computer to get. It doesn't really sit well with me. I'm not a big fan of the whole kind of like, oh, we are going to force you to have to pay every month to use the service that we could have just given you for a lump sum.
Oh, I agree with that fully. I mean, if digital is just a little bit cheaper, for me, it just happens to be on that fringe. Like different people have like different things. But I mean, if film was going to cost me $300 or $400 a month, well, at that point, yeah, I'll spend 1,000, like several thousands on a digital. But for me, like 100 or, $200 every 2 to 3 months. It's like kind of that perfect number where I don't really feel the need to go more expensive at that point.
That's also good though, because you have like a limitation. Like, you're not going to get stupid crazy and start spending because you buy a digital camera and then you buy the light boxes and then you buy the studio lights and then you buy a studio space and then you buy a bag and then you buy a new lens. You're just always buying stuff when actually the great thing about you right now is that what you can't afford and you work with that parameter.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is a clever way to do things actually, rather than just spending a ton of money and just being like, yeah, this is going to be great, and it turns out to be terrible. So anyway, moving away from gear slightly because
yeah.
So, do you think photography is a form of art?
Yeah, definitely. So I think anything that someone creates is a form of art. I know like people are talking about AI art these days.
Yes.
I hate that. I hate that so much.
Do you?
It's like if they created the program, sure. Like that's art at that point. No, I'd even go as far as saying like, I have a friend that makes these so like NFTs, I don't like NFTs for photos. I think it's like horrible. But NFTs and same thing with like, digital apes. I think that's ridiculous. But there's a certain like NFT subsect where it's like actual coding. It's an actual like, I had a friend explain it to me with what he did. but it's like you would buy this thing, and there was a certain chance that this thing would become a different thing. It's more of a video game than anything, but I like that sort of uh, approach to it. I would consider that an art because the way he does his coding and stuff, and the artists he involves to do like the design for it. I mean, those artists are getting paid a lot of money to draw up all these things, and his coding guys are making a lot of money writing up this code. Which, I mean, I think code is an art. I think a lot of things are an art that people don't consider. Even designing a house
Oh
is
yeah,
an art.
absolutely, absolutely. I think that's a funny thing. Like, and it comes back to a question I'll probably ask you in a second. But it's funny how, like, during the pandemic, people published lists of like the most important and the least important jobs, and art was like the least one of the least important jobs. And it's like, but if we didn't have art in the world, we wouldn't have anything. Like, art permeates every part of culture, whether that is designing a house, designing packaging, whether that's prints on a wall, whether that's architecture. Art is ingrained in society, and I think without art, everything would be very boring and bland. And it's kind of funny how society doesn't really value art. And I kind of wanted to ask you, kind of moving on from that question, is that do you think that society values photography?
You gotta clip that quote that you just said too. I think it was a really good quote. The way you said that, the way you described like art there, that's a good quote. I don't know. Like, I think generally, society will put too much value on certain big name photographers and kind of skim over a lot of like smaller name photographers. I follow probably about 500 people on Instagram. I think maybe 150 of them are photographers, and there's probably like 100 of them, and I would say that they are much better than I won't name names, but there's certain big name photographers that get a huge following, and I think at that point, like, there's like a bell curve. Like, they're good and they deserve like a fair bit of like appreciation, but then it goes too far up. Um, and I think a really good example of a bell curve for some of these guys. So Willem Verbeek, I love Willem Verbeek. His photography. I know he's one of the the YouTubers that a lot of people kind of cringe at, but I know. Like, I think he just gets lumped in with the other ones. But it's a bell curve. You start off, you're like, wow, this guy's amazing, and then at a certain point, they're like, oh no, this guy's overrated. But then, really, you got to stay at the top of that bell curve because I mean, I find he's quite good, like technically, like his framing, his exposure times, and the way he explains things in videos is really helpful. Like his night photography videos, really, really good.
So I think somebody like him, I think he's a really good example because I actually really like his work a lot. I don't look at it that often, actually. I should probably look at it a lot more. I should probably look at it later, actually. And I said his name, I'm back. I need to remember to look at his work. But I think the whole YouTube thing, I think you're right. People cringe at it and people are like, oh, you want to start a YouTube channel. But I think that's a whole skill set right there. People are like, oh, people may find it cringy and people may be like, oh, well, that's just, kind of a content creator kind of thing to do. But it's like that involves so much hard work and dedication. It's like Kyle McDougall, for instance. I don't know if you know his work. He's somebody who I have a lot of respect for because he does so many different things and he does them all very well. But that it's taken time to develop that. Like, it's not just a case of let's grab a camera, let's record myself, let's go out and take pictures. It's a whole set of skills, a whole process of learning, it's a whole process of making mistakes. And people can't deliver good quality content like that just off the cuff. It doesn't really work.
Yeah, so I like him, Peter McKinnon. I don't really watch any of their videos. Just if I'm given the choice between learning, basic exposure times from like a big channel or a small channel, I'm going to go with the small channel every time.
Yeah.
Bonus points too if it's a woman that's doing the channel because they usually get way less views. So I mean, I'm be way more likely to click on those videos. So you got to scroll down to find these, but it's the same information 90% of the time.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, actually. And actually, that's really funny because I posted a story the other day on my photography account of a few UK photographers whose work I really love. And somebody messaged me saying, why are they all men? And I was like, I didn't think about that because that's just my natural response to the people who I speak to. And I was like, these are people I speak to on a daily basis. And yeah, they happen to be men. A lot of photographers I speak to are men. But there is actually a huge kind of, for me at least, maybe a huge kind of divide in terms of like the kind of people who get exposure and the kind of people who don't. Like, a lot of women don't necessarily get the same exposure, or they don't necessarily have access to the same audience necessarily.
Yeah, it's really tough because I mean it's a tough thing for if you're not a dude, it's a tough thing to break into. But when I look at my own out like my own account, I see that more than 60% of the people that follow me are men. So I know that like the sort of night stuff I post, I can even see like who likes it. It's almost all men that like that stuff. A lot of women are not super interested in seeing random streets at night. And I find too, like someone's like trans or whatever. Sometimes they like it, and sometimes they don't like it. And it's no, there's no data on that, so I can't pull that up. It only shows me, male, female. But yeah, it's mostly guys that like my photos. Um, and I try to like differentiate. I always try to like, I like night photos too. So I try to find, you know, not just dudes with huge accounts that I'm following. I try to mix it up a bit, but it's tricky. Like it's not easy to find, even if you go looking for it. It's tough. It's tough. There's actually a really good black and white photographer. That's I mean, I only found her because one page. I think it's Women with Film. I think it's the best curated page. I don't even know how they're finding these women. I don't understand because the curation isn't amazing. And all of these accounts, they're like small accounts, like really really small accounts. But Christy Cornell, really good black and white photographer, really does a good job at I don't know, like adding mood to an image. That's the right way to say it. But yeah, you really got to go looking for that stuff.
So that's really interesting to say that. Actually, made me kind of think like, how many like female photographers can I list off the top of my head versus male photographers? Because male photographers is easy. I speak to 90% of the photographers I speak to are male, so I've got a list of people I speak to quite often. But female photographers, not really. There is a female photographer I actually published today on the front football called Astrid Francis, whose work is incredible. Her work is great. I'll send you her work later.
Yeah,
Um,
please do.
and I'm thinking of people like Sarah Culler, who's also awesome. Her work is great as well. And actually, now I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking more people. So I'll send you a list actually, the people that I know or people that I've came across if you're interested. Because now you said that, I kind of feel like that is actually a really good point. It's not something I've really considered, and it's something that I've been thinking about today because it's a message the other day. But it's kind of interesting to think about, like, we want to give everybody representation and we want to give everybody the right exposure. It's very easy to kind of cater to, particularly when it comes to something like nighttime images, for instance, which are, both overdone and also very popular. It's very easy to kind of fall into the category of like, this is your audience. You're only going to kind of produce content for that audience, when actually you want to be at least a bit more universal, and not just everything doesn't have to be like hard lines and kind of rough images, and it doesn't have to all be kind of, have that kind of energy that, only guys were like, it's the, you want your educated to everybody because you don't know who's looking at it. Which is actually something I've never thought about. Like I said that, I'm like, I should think about that. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
it's like a self-fulfilling thing too, because
Yeah,
like obviously a lot more men do this stuff, which means a lot more like a lot less women do it, but more women would want to do it if more women did it because when you look to find like an inspiration, I mean, it's got to feel a little bit like not great when you're trying to get into a field and almost no one that looks like you is has made it in that field or become successful in any way. Not saying that like they haven't become successful, but you look at the saturation, like almost all of the big name photographers are dudes. So that's probably like a little bit of a gut punch for not a dude trying to get into photography.
that's very true. And now that I'm writing some names down that I'm going to send you later, because I'm just like, I've thought of a few people now, so that's cool. I can name at least more than two. That's good. That's a good sign. Um, but
Yeah,
that's actually really interesting to think about, actually. But I think one of the best ways you can find that is if you find one artist, find who is following them and who they're following, because more often than not, the people who comment on an artist post or the people that follow that artist, as the saying goes, like attracts like. It's very, very true. One of the best ways that I find new artists is from comments and follows, because yeah, like follows like, end of the day, it's just the way it works. So that's always a good way to find new and interesting artists that aren't going to be the most popular, that aren't going to be the most widely discussed, that aren't going to be, that overexposed.
yeah, and like I like to avoid a lot of the big reshare accounts because I went through a few of them one time, and it's like, man, you guys just share the same 15 to 20 people every month. I mean, I don't know. I like to look for reshare accounts that share like a variety of people's work rather than just like the top 5% of people.
As somebody who obviously has an account which I share a lot of different artists, it really depends on where you're coming from, because I think it's very, very easy just to find the most widely established artists, the most artists with the most followers, and follow and share their work, because that's going to get you guaranteed views, you know. But then I personally, for me, at least what I do is I prefer to find accounts that have like 100 views or 100 followers, or like, you know, not that many people know about them, and share them, because that's much more important. The community side of what I do is more important than the numbers. And I think you have to kind of weigh up what is more important for you. It just really depends. It depends.
Yeah, I like the way you curate it. I really do. And the other thing too is like, as you really get going, like you're going to get, and I can probably introduce you to a few more people, but you know, you're getting some bigger name artists on here, which is going to draw more views, which is going to help some of the earlier people that you did. Because when people get into podcasts, I usually start at the beginning and work my way up. But yeah, like, you know, I think Charlie with you know, Caffeine Cowboy, I think that was a really, really good get for you, and it was a really good conversation, because it's you know, it's one of my favorite photographers, and I've always wondered, like, you know, what's his process, like, you know, what's he do? So it was kind of cool to listen to that, and you know, how, you know, that's what he's like.
It's weird. So okay, so the funny story about him, and the funny story about Cursed by Morrow as well. And I've said this in a previous interview. I don't know if it's, I don't know what interview it was. I don't know if it's when it's released or whatever. It's probably going to be out by the time this is out. But the only way I got those two interviews is because they had Charlie, for instance. He put and asked me anything up on his stories, and my question to him was, "Can I interview for my podcast?" And he said yes. And that's how I saw it. Because I knew that if I emailed him directly, he would probably never respond, because he probably gets so many emails a day. You know, you kind of have to take, as far as I'm concerned, take opportunities whilst you can. Like, I sent the message and I was like, I probably sound really stupid. It's probably a stupid idea, but he's actually super lovely. I had the best time talking to him, and he's lovely. Like, I don't speak to him often, but I message him here and there. You know, we keep in touch, and I think that's awesome, because he's a great photographer, and he's super mysterious as well. You don't really, you know, there's no interviews with him out there, you know. And I'm always interested in trying to find the people that like to hide, because I feel like they have more to say. They just don't know how to say it or where to say it.
That's another really good quote. You should clip that one too.
That's one of them today.
Yeah,
no,
there's quite a few photographers like that. Like he was one of them, but there's a few of them that I'm like, you know, I wonder what they're like, because it's really cool when they are talented and they're good at what they do, and they're still, you know, like good people, and they're nice and stuff.
Yeah, and I'm always surprised that people are so lovely. It sounds super weird, but I'm always surprised, because you would think that somebody like Charlie, who does have a really good following, and you know, who is actually in very many ways he's quite renowned. Like, he's just an absolutely lovely guy. He's so humble, so down to earth, and he hasn't even been doing photography for that long. Like, he only started in the pandemic, you know. And if you think about like his success, like, it hasn't gone to his head. It's not being like, oh, I'm the best, and he still has stuff to learn. And I don't know. I just find people very fascinating, and I feel like the more people try to hide, the more I'm interested in them, because I feel like they have so much to say. They just don't know how to say it. Or, like, as I say to everybody, like, all I want this podcast to be is a space for people to talk about their work. That's all I want, you know. Like, that's it. So it's fascinating.
Oh yeah, a couple of things to go back on. So like the early inspiration, I forgot to mention, there's 4 main accounts I started following that really kind of kickstarted it. Oscar Diaz. So he's sort of like I don't know if I would call him a street photographer, because he does a lot more, but New York-based photographer, really, really good. He actually followed me back like a year or two ago, and it was early on, so I was like, oh, this is cool. Like, this is one of my favorite photographers. I didn't expect that. So that gave me a nice bit of confidence. But he does some really, really cool stuff. And like early on, like that's what got me really kind of interested in it. Another guy, I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation of this name, Vianditya Doanada. I'm sorry if he hears this. I screwed that one up, but his Instagram is I'll send it to you. It's like Ufakablad or whatever. It sounds like a swear word. It's not. He does really, really cool stuff. He recently switched to film. It would definitely be like street, but like night street. And that was my main inspo. And then 2 other people, Andrea Dettel. Her work is like sort of has like a film type green cast to it. It's very interesting. I it didn't get me started on film, but it got me interested in photography. But it works out that when you underexpose film, you get a green cast.
Wow.
Um, and then Microsoft Surf too. That's another big photographer that had followed me back at one point, which was, I don't know. It's always cool like when someone does something like that. Because anyways, but yeah, she's super cool. Does a lot of really cool. Her art form is like two different things. So she takes the photos, but her editing is like an entirely different art form. The way she does it, like with the color grading, really, really unique stuff. Like it would lend itself well to, I don't know, like a Netflix short series or something. Like really, really cool stuff.
Have you ever seen the work of Visual Memories?
I have not, but you should definitely send me that.
I've added the list. Yes, I think you'll like it. Um, because like, so the interesting thing is that how weird is it that somebody following you could mean so much?
That's
It's,
like a confidence boost.
but it's also interesting because do you ever consider that like you following other people could mean so much to them?
Yeah, I always do. Like if I notice one person's always like, supporting my stuff. I mean, but like I've 1,700 followers. Like I'm not a big account. I'll still do it, and I would still do it if I had 100,000. But yeah, I don't know. It's a nice gesture.
Because it's weird that something so simple and something that so in very many ways so mindless can actually be so impactful. Like it's quite bizarre because I agree with you. There's people who have followed me and I'm like, wow, that's incredible. But at the same time, it also doesn't mean anything in a way. It's bizarre.
It's an acknowledgement. It's like waving at someone on the street. It's unexpected, but like if you know who someone is and they don't know who you are, um, I don't know. It's tough to say. Like I don't think I'll ever have the following of these people, but it's cool to have that sort of support, I guess.
But would you rather have? But see, I agree with that, and I'm not. And as much as I'm trying to sound, I probably sound very cynical, but I also kind of feel like I would much rather have somebody that didn't follow me engage with me and talk to me than somebody following me that never talks to me. You know?
Well, the thing is, these people all engage and with me more than a lot of the other people. Like I'll get people that will just follow me, never like any of my photos ever. And it's like, well, why would I follow you back? I don't even know if you like my photos or if you're just using like a software to get me to follow you and
Yeah,
then
that is
unfollow
true.
me.
That's
That's
I
why I
mean,
don't follow more people back because I can't stay on top of it. Too many people do that where they follow and then unfollow, and it's annoying.
I personally just don't really care. I'm at a point now where I just don't care. I just honestly I follow people because I want to keep up with them. I do a really bad job of doing that most of the time. And
Oh,
then
you're
I
fine.
have people I want to talk to that I talk to. Like if I follow somebody, it's because I like their work. Um, that's really it. It's because I want to message them at some point to be on the website or to be on the podcast, or I just like what they do. Um, I don't know, the whole kind of following and following situation. I think it's just bizarre. The more I think about it in terms of what it is, the weirder it seems. I don't know.
For me, it's two things. It's like it's almost like it's the intention and the nature of it. It's just
Hmm.
it irks me. Uh, it's fake. It irks me in that way, but also I find in photography. 1 minute left, so I'll say this quick. In photography, I find one of the biggest problems is that there's too many people that are just trying to show their stuff and they
Yeah.
have no intention of engaging with other people. And there's a place for that, but I mean, look at the Granary app.
Yeah.
I mean that's too niche. That's too niche. Too many people on there are just trying to share their stuff. They don't actually care about other people's photos. And I think the photography community needs to be a bit more supportive of each other rather than just here's my photos. Oh, I don't care about your photos. I don't. Yeah, needs to change.
The thing about photography and community and the idea of like you're right, like it seems a lot of the time, and it's easy to fall kind of victim to, but like you want people just to see your work, but you also have to engage with the people because how do you expect people to invest in you if you're not going to invest in them? You know, it's a give and take. Social media, this is a much later conversation, but like social media is such a give and take. You can't just throw your work out there and expect people to like it. You know,
Exactly. Yeah, it's got to be mutual. I mean, it's like any relationship with anyone and anything. You can't expect people to just be your friend and not be their friend.
and not just that, like you want to actually make friends. Like that's the thing. You actually want to create community and build connections. And if you're not interested in doing that, then just don't do that. Because I think we forget like photography itself is, it takes time to create photography. but it also takes time to build a relationship. So you're not just going to be best friends with somebody as soon as you meet them. You're not going to both just kind of hit it off immediately. You have to. It takes time for you to understand somebody, to understand their work. I think the one biggest thing I see with artists is that people expect, like artists expect, or some artists, should I say, expect people to understand their work without being able to show themselves. And I feel like as an artist, you have to be somewhat present so that people understand you, so they can then understand your work. Because if they don't know who you are, how are they going to understand your work? Or how are they going to kind of want to invest in your work if they can't invest in you? If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes good sense.
I guess it's like you said about Charlie earlier. It's like, you're curious about him because you like his work. It's like we're always very curious about the person creating the images, because art is very much a documentation of a person's life and thoughts and emotions and feelings. So, you're essentially looking at the person through images.
Yeah, and it's nice to put a personality to that sometimes. I find it's interesting.
So, kind of getting to you and your practice, just a few more intro questions, I guess, would be like, what is the biggest challenge of being a photographer?
Ooh, challenge. I've literally shot almost every single building and area at night. I'll drive around for 3 hours and I won't find anything. In fact, me and my two friends that we usually shoot with, for us to find anything to shoot now, we have to drive almost 2 hours through our province, and still, like that's yeah, like well, that'll dry off very soon.
Oh yeah, that's actually really funny because there's a photographer I interviewed. I'm gonna say 2 weeks ago. I can't remember when it was. I should probably know. His name's Ronnie Ackling, and he lives in Birmingham here in the UK. He's actually not that far away from me, and he said the same thing. Like his problem right now is that he's stuck in a rut because he's photographed everywhere that he can around him. And traveling is great, but it costs money. It's time. It's resources you may not have. So I'm just kind of curious. Like, so how are you going to combat that? So like, what are kind of like, if there is any plans you have, like, what kind of plans do you have to kind of make sure you're still creating with what is around you, even if you've kind of done everything?
Yeah, so I took a trip to Montreal, Quebec. I took two trips to Montreal, Quebec. One I flew, the other one I drove. So I took some, shots of the metro, some shots around the city, and that was fun. But the timing, like the finances and everything, like
Yeah.
couldn't have done that at a worse time in my life. The finances after it's been mayhem. It's been mayhem, but I'm gonna force myself to spend money to travel and get out, because the only way I could combat that locally is getting into portraiture a little bit. But I mean, there's only so much. I mean, I find film and portraiture is like not really the best way to get into portraiture, because even if you take a
Yeah.
good photo, I mean, if you shoot at the slightly wrong time and someone's eyes are closed, it's not like I'm taking 5 photos in a row where I'll still get their eyes
Yeah.
open. Like that's a $3 photo that is going to look terrible.
Yeah, it's a huge risk. It's a huge risk, especially if it's something that you're not comfortable necessarily doing, not something you necessarily have experience in doing as well, particularly because I think taking pictures of people seems very easy on the surface, but it can be extremely challenging, because if you're shooting with a person who has no experience modeling, if you're shooting with somebody who's not comfortable in front of a camera, if you're shooting somebody at nighttime and you're shooting film, for instance, like all of these different things are going to present challenges all together combined. It's a whole different ballgame. So I definitely feel like that's a really good point you raised. And not just that, it's kind of like I've seen a huge shift recently within the last 3 months of a lot of photographers that I follow and talk to shooting portraits as opposed to just places. And I kind of feel like it's a good shift, I think. But I think it's very easy to get tied up in shooting one kind of image, or like being known for a type of image. Like, how do you, as a photographer, make sure you're evolving, but also having something, having like your own signature style, or something where people can understand it's your work, if that makes sense. Like, how do you not keep yourself trapped in a box?
Yeah, so I find some photographers are really, really good at, you see their work, it's them. There's quite a few people, but I'm going to name two people. One I see on Reddit sometimes that I don't even know the guy's Instagram. I just, when I see the photo pop on Reddit, I know it's him or them. I don't know. It's AA_battery, and it's just the landscapes. And there was another guy I found through Reddit. I have this one on Instagram. Neum Brickley. I think it's Neum Brickley. If you go in the people I'm following, you type in NIAM. Ridiculously cool landscapes, and I'm not particularly into landscapes, but those are really, really cool landscapes. And I find every time I see it, I know who it is. But like same with Microsoft Serve, the girl I follow, she follows me back. Um, I recognize her stuff anywhere. I mean, God, you could take a photo of a fridge. I'd probably still recognize it from the color grading. I find a lot of people have a lot of different things that become recognizable. Definitely not me. I don't find I actually have any specific uh, thing. Like, I don't think anyone's going to look at any one of my photos and say, "Oh, this is Ryan that shot this." I don't think it's obvious at all.
Do you want to make it obvious? Like, is that something you want to develop over the years?
I don't know. I'm kind of all over the place. Like, I like variety in things, and it also takes a lot of effort and a lot of like skill and like thought to make your work very like visually identifiable. And
Yeah.
I just don't know if I like would be able to do that if I wanted to. So it's like, I mean, maybe a couple of my like long exposures at night might be identifiable as me, but I don't make it a big enough percentage of my work to really be, you know, something that is clearly me.
So actually, let's get into your work a little bit. So for those who may not have seen it, can you just kind of describe the kind of work you create?
I'll find it here. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I take a big variety of stuff. It's hard to like categorize it. I would say like most of it that people see, that the ones that do well, the ones that people see on Instagram are they're just long exposures at night. I don't have a light meter or anything like that. Sometimes I'll have a camera with a light meter, my Nikon F801S, but most of my cameras don't have working light meters when it gets that dark. So
Oh.
I'm like guessing most of the time. I don't really know how to explain what's going on in my head, but I don't have like a reciprocity calculator. I don't have like a light meter. I'm just kind of like doing this weird math equation in my head, like, oh, this feels like it might look good. And I think I'm just getting really lucky because like a lot of these things just come out looking exactly how I want them to. It's nice. It's nice.
So I think that's really interesting because a lot of the people I've spoken to, like JC Fox, Nico Evermore, like Passe I spoke to in the past, who's a good friend of mine now. People like that, they shoot a lot of different things. They shoot a whole variety of images. And I'm kind of curious, like, do you ever worry that maybe you're shooting things that are too varied?
Yeah. So I know that I sometimes take stuff that's too varied that is not going to appeal to certain, like, probably, I mean, I can tell when I post something and I lose followers, but it's funny. The ones that will lose me followers will also gain me new different followers. So I mean, I probably don't do the best job at trying to build my following because at the end of the day, regardless of how well something does on Instagram, I like posting my dumb little twilight
Yeah.
shots or my black and white stuff, and I know my audience doesn't like it, but I mean, I got to do it.
So I'm kind of curious, like, do you consider yourself a professional photographer?
Definitely not. If I wanted to, I could probably be a good real estate photographer. I think right now I'm the third best one in my tiny city, but that's not saying much. But like professional photographer to do it for work, definitely not. Definitely not.
Like, would that be something you'd want to achieve? Like, would you want to be at a point where, say, like, for instance, you're selling prints, having workshops, teaching classes, that kind of thing? Was that something you'd be interested in doing?
I don't think I really know enough to teach classes. Like I can pretty much tell everyone everything I know about photography within like an hour or two. Go shoot with them a couple times, and they'll get the hang of it, and then they'll evolve from there. But like the more nuanced, detailed, and technical questions, I can tell you what you need to know, but I can't explain what it is that you need to know. I can just tell you like you need to look up reciprocity failure. You need a tripod, but if you want to know what type of tripod or what is reciprocity failure, all I can explain is that the film loses sensitivity at a certain point, and sometimes films don't. But it depends. And then doing it for work, I don't think I would like to do it for work. It would be cool to sell more prints and maybe have like a photo in like a gallery or something like that. But I don't really have a strong desire to do like professional work. If I do portraiture, it's got to be like artistic. It's got to be more so for like me and the other person than I need like paid work. I've had a few people offer to like pay me money to do things like weddings, I'm shooting a wedding in September, but I'm not really charging for it. I'm just covering the cost just because, I want to see like what my wedding photos look like. But if
Yeah.
someone wanted to pay me money to do a wedding, even if I had a digital camera, I don't think I'd want to do it. I think it would just not really be up my alley. I think I find it funny when people ask me to shoot weddings because if you look at my Instagram feed, it's like, I mean, I think maybe I could shoot like I don't know, like a funeral, but like I don't know if you'd want me like shooting a wedding. So, but I'm excited because I kind of want to like prove that I can take decent wedding photos this September. But it's definitely not a thing that I'm like, all right, you can charge me. I got a different photographer to be the main shooter, and I'm going on a second shooter instead. And
Yeah.
she's really good. She does a great job. So I don't have the stress of like trying to nail everything. I can just get creative and do some unique stuff that may or may not turn out well. Uh,
And that's a great way to go about it because you're giving yourself the flexibility to be able to try something new without any risk of actually having to produce incredibly great images for somebody's, memories that, you don't want to mess up because, if you mess that up, it's not going to be ideal. But also, I think that's very funny because I feel like as soon as you have somebody you're a photographer, people automatically assume you'll shoot weddings. Like the amount of people who have asked me to shoot weddings, I'm like, I don't shoot weddings. And they're like, oh, you can make a lot of money. I'm like, yeah, but I don't care about making a lot of money. That's not why I create work. Yes, it'll be nice to make more money, sure. But I think sometimes people don't realize, or at least people who aren't artistic or who aren't in the art sphere, they don't realize that you can create work to create work. You can go out and take images because you want to go and take images. You don't have to make money from what you're doing. I think it's a huge kind of misconception that, oh, you're a photographer, you must shoot weddings, you must make a lot of money. It's like, you can just want to go around, travel around at night and take images for the sake of doing it.
yeah, I mean, I feel like that's probably like a consequence or side effect of society when so much of what we do revolves around, dollars and cents. For a lot of people are like, oh, we think you're good at this, so you should try and turn this into a profitable thing. And I think like that's
Yeah.
just not the right mindset to have with anything related to art because, I mean, look at the NFT people. It ruins their photos, in my opinion, because there's a big, even if it's a good photo, it's hard to be into a photo knowing that someone has created it to sell it as an NFT. I just can't really stomach that. But yeah, I mean, I think people should be careful with which art forms that they want to turn into income. Burn out really quick.
Yes, I really agree because a lot of people actually ask me about my opinion on NFTs, which is funny. I'm like, I know nothing about NFTs. Don't ask me anything. But what I've always said to photographers who've asked me, I've said like, if you're going to think about selling NFTs as a photographer, then do something with your image that makes it more than an image. Do something that's going to animate it. Do something that's going to make it more, in very many ways, more of an art piece than just a photograph, because that's what you're going to sell, and it's not going to be everything else that's going to be on your website as a print. If someone's going to pay for an NFT, make it an experience for that person. So they're going to want to pay for that. Make it unique, make it actually an actual one-off piece rather than just be, oh, I have these images on my hard drive that I'm doing nothing with. Let's just put them into a collection and sell them. Because yeah, you can do that. That's cool. But, don't you want to give somebody an experience, not just an image?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like the NFT I talked about earlier, like that's basically a video game. So it's like not really entirely what it is. But I mean, the idea that someone would buy like an NFT of a photo, it's like, what are you going to do with that? Like, you have some digital fake house that you're going to put it in, or I don't know. I saw one interesting thing though. It was like a virtual reality gallery, and I don't like it for NFT, but I think it would be a really cool idea to sell uh, photos or prints. Just people were walking around, and the photos were hung up on this weird digital wall. But if you could actually buy those with real dollars and get a real print instead of, I don't know, a
Yeah.
JPEG. Feels weird to pay for a JPEG. I can't do that.
I kind of worry, I guess, in a way that like, why are people spending so much time and effort and money buying digital products when they could just literally just buy a print? Like, there are so many photographers, amazing photographers selling prints at stupidly affordable prices. But rather than buy from them and support small businesses, you'd rather just buy a JPEG from some random person of like an ape that you really don't care about. And that honestly, you're buying just for the clout. You're not even buying because you like it. You're buying it because it makes you look good for a millisecond on the internet. You know?
Yeah. So I think a lot of that, I mean, it's no secret that a lot of the art world, for as long as we know, has been driven quite a bit by money laundering for different things.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
what makes the NFTs so popular for money laundering is because it's so much easier to kind of hide that and get that through. I don't know much about the financial sphere, but I imagine there might be some sort of convenience to being able to launder money with how digital everything is these days. But again, like it's kind of hard if you're buying like 40 or 50 prints from different artists versus one painting that's $1 million or a digital photo of an ape that's $300,000. And like it's all like Ethereum or Bitcoin. So I mean, I don't really know what goes on with the whole Bitcoin, Ethereum, money laundering. Like I know that there's something there. Don't really know what it is, but I think that's why NFTs sell as much as they do versus digital or like prints from like me, for example, because you'd have to buy so many prints to launder money that it would be probably more suspicious than if you went and bought like a car.
I just feel like why not just not launder money and why not just buy prints because you want to support artists? Why not just do that?
Yeah, I think it's because most of the people with lots of money that want to support artists. I think most of the money in art is not from people that want to support artists. I think
Oh yeah.
I mean, I don't know what the percentage is. It could be 50-50, but I definitely don't think an overwhelming majority of people with money supporting artists necessarily even like people like me would be like not even a blip on the radar, just because I don't even know if someone like Willem Verbeek would be anything more than a blip on the radar for some of these people.
Yeah.
He makes darkroom prints. Like, I mean, that's the other thing too. I'm much more likely to buy someone's darkroom print than a digital print if they're a film photographer. That's why I feel weird selling like my prints. I would buy someone else's prints. I have nothing against someone doing like prints off the website darkroom, but I just think it's so cool when someone makes a handmade print in the darkroom. I would pay 3, 4, 5 times the money for something like that because it's literally a one-off.
So that's actually very interesting because there's an artist I interviewed a while back. His name's Anno Mystery, and he is a mixed media artist. And one thing that he said to me in our interview, and it's really stuck with me since, is that a lot of galleries that he has his work sold at are saying to him that you need to make your because he uses photographs as part he shoots his own photographs, uses like a base for his work. His work's incredible, but a lot of the galleries were saying to him that you need to make your photographs more into pieces of art than just photographs because that's what's going to make them sell. So the idea of making something that's handmade, making something that is going to be unique, making something that is more than just an image that is reproduced, will make it more of a piece of art. And people value art more than value just a solid photograph. Unfortunately, it's just the honest truth, It's just the way the world is. But it's kind of, it makes me at least always think about like, so how can you offer something more than just an image? Like, what else can you do to make it a piece of art?
I think a very simple thing that a photographer can do, even if it's a digital print of a film photo or a digital photo, just sign the back and date and number it. Like every print I do now is dated and numbered, and the ones that I've sold that are not dated and numbered, I know which ones they are. Like they're the first or the second.
Yeah.
Like I have it on my notes. I track it all. That's why I stopped using that darkroom website because it's impossible for me to track it. I can't say that this is 1 of 10 or 2 of 10. So now, like, when I do stuff, I want to make sure that it's a trackable number. And I don't want something I sell to be something that anyone can buy anytime. Like, I'd like my prints to be able to hold some value. Like my Larry Electric print, I've sold, I think, 2, maybe 3 of those. I will never sell more than 10 of those. At least as 8x12s. And if I do another run, it'll be at a bigger size. It won't be at 8x12.
Yeah.
So like those people that own those 2, I think it's 2, and I have a third one here. But the people that own the 2 Larry Electric prints, like those are 1 and 2, and there will never be like another 1 or 2 like that.
Yeah, it's about exclusivity. It's about giving something to somebody and saying this is the only copy, or like there's only a limited number. Scarcity improves value. It's obviously very obvious when you think about like limited edition prints of artists and kind of the amount of money people can pay for limited edition stuff. But I also kind of think like, do you ever worry that maybe your art isn't accessible to everybody if you're selling limited editions or if you're selling stuff that's a lot more scarce?
Well, my art is my photos are cheap, and they still don't sell for the most part. So, I mean, if someone really wants, like, I mean, a couple of my carnival photos, I think I maybe sold three or four of, but there's plenty of value or options, I guess. I mean, all people have to do is like send me a message. Let me know if I can get one of those done, and I'll print the rest of the run and then sell them as that. But um, I don't think there's enough demand for accessibility to be a concern right now. And because it's cheap, I mean, like what I do, like locally, if I don't have to do shipping, I'll do three for 20, and they're in frames at $20. So like I don't really make much money on that, but
Yeah.
like locally, I mean, the idea that someone would want to hang like a print that I took, I mean, I think that's pretty cool right now. And I would like to think if they're that interested in my work and they're going to support me like that, I would like that the thing that they bought would be worth more, whether it's like 50, 60 years or whatever, because none of us are going to be around forever.
See, that's true. And that's actually just very true. Because I have a print here actually by a really cool artist called Honor the Film. His name's Eric. And I paid it's the most expensive print I own. It wasn't a crazy amount of money, but it was more money than I would normally spend on a print. But we actually kind of haggled the price, which I don't know if I should really be saying this on the podcast, but we kind of haggled the price a bit because he said to me, like, because he's from Germany and I'm obviously in the UK, he was like, I would love to have my work on somebody's wall in the UK. So I'll come down on the price a little bit. And I was like, cool, that's perfect for me. It's still more money than that, I'm happy to pay that money. And it was kind of just interesting because the value of actually having that work on somebody's wall is actually a lot more significant than the amount of money you can make, the profit you can make off that image. So I think that's really interesting. And not just that, you have to remember, like, for instance, I'm definitely going to check out your prints because I'm going to buy prints, some more prints at some point. I'm moving out at the end of next week, the week after next. And I need to see what space I've got. And then I'm going to buy loads of prints because I want to there's so many cool artists I see that I want to buy their work. So it's like, I'll definitely check out your work because I'm guaranteed you'll have images that I'll be very interested in. But it's kind of like, it's always nice to have your work appreciated by people. And it's nice to have your work in print as well. I think not enough photographers do. Anyways, let's get back into your work because we've kind of danced around that subject. So are there any particular kind of themes you're drawn to in your work, like, or kind of particular locations that you're drawn to?
Yeah, so I'd say like the overarching theme in everything I do, whether it's like a daylight photo or a photo that's black and white, night, twilight, any sort of shot. The one theme would be sort of like a desolate, empty type of theme. Like I go for something that's more like melancholy, somber, that sort of thing. I like to think like even like the happy daylight shots kind of have like this sort of like emptiness. Like where are the people? I guess. And if there are people, I still try to make it look empty because like isolate that one person. Make people kind of wonder like what's going on in that one person's life.
So it's really funny. And I know I do this to myself all the time, but like every photographer that I've ever interviewed for the podcast has very similar work, and that's not a mistake because that's the kind of work I love. It's the work I love to shoot. It's the work that I love to see. But I'm also I always get a bit concerned because I'm like, am I just literally having the same conversation over and over again? Probably. But also it's just a case of like, why do you think that this idea of like desolation, this idea of emptiness, this idea of like open space, like why is that such a compelling subject matter?
I can't speak for everyone else, but that's kind of just how I view the world is like, like edgy as that sounds. Like, I don't know, I try to make sure that like what I shoot kind of conveys like, what I think. And I imagine other people are probably like in the same boat. I mean, it's a strange planet we live on, so it can be tricky at times.
But what do you think that says about you?
I've had a very a lot of people have had like very difficult lives. A lot of people have had very like probably much more difficult lives. I mean, Like there's no question about that. But uh, I think the uniqueness of my situation growing up, I don't think that too many people like have been subject to that same sort of unique level
Mm.
of like their life might have been way worse than mine, but like mine is so unique and weird that even for like human sake, like it's still strange. So I spent trying to go like the least amount of details possible, but I spent a
Yeah, of
lot
course.
of my
Yeah,
life
absolutely.
like isolated. The first 13 years of
Okay.
my life, it was in a joint custody thing. When I was at my
Um,
dad's house, so it was my dad and my mom. My dad, absolute lunatic, violent type of human, and then my
um,
mom, she was sweet, really good. Her husband at the time was fine. That changed later, but anyways, the first 13 years of my life, my dad was constantly, whether it was legal, physical, he was trying to take me away from my mom. He made sure to threaten me all the time from like age of like 2 to 3, right up until the day where I left. I'll get into that in a bit, but uh, this meant that I was never allowed to have like friends over. Rarely I was allowed to have friends over. I wasn't allowed to make calls outside of the house. He actually kidnapped me at one time, and I didn't think I was coming back. And this is all when I'm like a child. So when you're 2 and 3
yeah,
and
exactly.
being told that like, hey, you're never going back there, like it's a scary thing for a young child. And when you're 9, 10 years old, in like a hotel room, and the cops are looking for you, you're like, well, shit, I'm probably never going to see my mom and my friends again. So that's sort of like isolation type thing. The Twilight shot specifically, I grew up on a street called Rennick, and at the time there was nothing behind, but there was the power lines. I remember going to bed looking out the window all the time at the power lines, and I always liked the way the sky sort of like created a silhouette. So whenever I shoot Twilight, it's like that's kind of what that's about. And then the night stuff. I don't really know when the night stuff started. Actually, no, I do. So that was like kind of that part of the isolation. And obviously the daytime, I would spend a lot of time, just looking outside the window, hoping that I'd see someone I would know drive or walk by, just so I'd feel a little bit more connected to them, because it was difficult being like that isolated and basically like in jail for so long. But even when I was around friends, the other half of the time, like, there's a very strong disconnect and isolation, because, I was
Yeah.
gone half the time. Even half the family like, that I still have, there's a huge disconnect because I was gone half the time. And then 14, through high school years, I wound up switching high schools 3 times. I would keep like detaching from friend groups and like isolating them. So certain things like the liminal spaces, for example, I would stare at like, when other friends are like talking and stuff, I'd be staring at like different parts of different rooms and like kind of just observing the lights and little things too, like how dust would sort of float in through a light and golden hour. Like I have a few things that kind of stuck in my brain like visually during those times. And then I had one more like period of time where I was extremely isolated. I got sick when I was 19, right out of high school. Broke up with my girlfriend at the same time. Immediately got sick. Immediately lost my job. I spent 2 full years in 2013 and 14 completely alone. There was 2 friends that would check on me, but everyone else that I had ever known, except for my mom, obviously, was out of the picture. So it was difficult, like waking up, going to bed, like very, very difficult. And what I would do to try and feel connected is I would just go for drives late at night. Sometimes I'd drive through downtown just to kind of wonder, what it was like to, have that sort of life. So you can only drive through downtown so much here, and then you start driving through other bits of town. So like old industrial parks, and you just look at like the lighting, the textures, the details, and I guess over time this sort of like marinated in my brain. And whenever I go shoot now, it's like, I won't say it's like an homage because that's cliche, but a lot of like what I shoot is just kind of the things that I've spent the most time looking at. So I haven't spent a lot of time looking at people quite the same as other people. I love people, but it's just, that's not how my life has been. So for me, looking at like buildings, maybe scenes that might be like boring, sort of fleeting moments, like when if you've ever been like a kid driving by and like your parents' car looking out the window. Uh, I always try to like ask people, remember those things that you would just look at, and it was just like a split second. Even in day to day life, people that walk through things like subways or streets, and I think a lot of photographers do a really good job at conveying this. we walk by these things and we observe them so casually through peripheral vision and just glances, but they are the place where we dream. When we dream, this is where we are. We observe so much of this space in passing that we have the detail and we're able to put it in dreams. And a lot of these photographers, they're just snapshotting and doing that, and I'm doing the same. And whenever I tell people too, and they say, "Oh, I don't know if I could be a photographer," I just ask them, "Have you ever spent more than 2 or 3 seconds looking at one thing?" Like, you really got to challenge yourself. When people say that they're not a photographer or couldn't do it, that's just the way that they're thinking about themselves. They're doubting themselves before they've started. But the minute you spend like 2, 3 seconds looking at something and observing any sort of detail, whether it's conscious or subconscious, I think at that moment, you are a photographer. Like you said, it's the eye. You can own a car. You might not know how to drive it, but that doesn't mean you don't own a car.
That's really fascinating. There's so much I can say from that, because there's definitely parts of that I can definitely relate to. And there's definitely parts that I know other photographers that I know more about their personal lives can also relate to. And I think it's really fascinating, because then photography in a kind of some form is like almost like a form of therapy. It's almost like a way for you to kind of, as I always say to everybody anyway, like art is, and I said this earlier to somebody on the long voice message, but all art is like a way to externalizing the internal. That's what art is. It's a way for you to show your inner emotions, show your feelings, show your thoughts
I really
to
like
other
that
people.
quote. You should clip that quote you just said.
I've said it better before somewhere else, but that's what it is. You're externalizing your internal mind, because that's all that art is. It's just a way for you to process your thoughts, your feelings, the person you are, which is why I say, when you're looking at an image, whether it's a painting, whether it's a photograph, like you're looking at the person creating it. Every image is a self-portrait, whether you're involved or not. And I think we forget that.
That's another really good quote. I'm sorry I keep doing this, but like, you're saying a lot of really good things that like really, really good quotes there. Like, I love the way that you explain those things. It's really nice.
I appreciate that. It makes me sound like I know what I'm doing, which is perfect. I've done this a long time, so I guess it's a good job that somebody likes what I'm saying. I'm glad. But I just kind of feel like I'm very passionate about art, because I think we forget how important art is, not just to society, but also to the people who create art. Because at the end of the day, like, as I say to a lot of artists, I say, this is your life. This is not just you. Let's shoot an image on a random Monday. Like, this is your time. You're spending your life doing this. And, that photo shoot you spent 3 hours doing, like, that's time you're never going to get back. So you actually have something to show for it. It might not be the best image ever. It might not be something you like, but it's a dedication. Art is a way of living. It's not just something you do, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's perfectly said.
I don't know.
That's perfectly said.
As I always say, I'm just a random guy from England. I know nothing. That's all it's one of those things where, like,
we're all random people. All of us.
That's so funny. Like, so many people say that back to me when I say that. They're like, we're all random people. I'm like, okay. I just feel like, okay, there's so much I want to say. So I'm kind of interested, actually. I guess it kind of almost goes back to what we said before about being the photographer being kind of like male dominated. But I also kind of wonder, like, the more I talk to photographers, especially male photographers, the more I kind of notice that there is a huge trend of photographers who shoot wide empty spaces, of photographers who go out and shoot at night. And I kind of almost wonder, like, do you think it's related to the idea that in society, the way men are treated and the way women are treated are very different, and the way that men have friends and the way that women have friends are very different? Because I've had this conversation with a few people, and someone once said to me, like, men are taught to be alone. Men are raised to be lonely, which is a very interesting way of looking at things. It's not necessarily the right way, but it's an interesting way. Do you think that plays a huge role in the way in which not just you, but other people take pictures and what they choose to take pictures of?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the culture changes from place to place. I find, over the last few years since 2015, people like trans people. I don't know if it's people who are trans or trans people. I'm not sure what the right way to say that is, but I find like that sort of emergence has kind of caused women in general to be more open to more like feminine aspects of men. And it started with the pink shirts, and then, fashion became a lot more popular for men. So I think as those things started to bridge and form together, at least where I live, by the time I got into photography, things kind of changed quite a bit. With that being said, I think a lot of the guys that are drawn to shooting the stuff I shoot, they might be in that same boat, but it's really tough to tell from the photos.
Yeah. Yeah, because like how do you know if what you're shooting is a reflection of how you're feeling, or if it's just a certain aesthetic you like? Because the whole liminal space aesthetic, especially, it's quite strong, and it's there's a community there, and it's always compelling anyway, whether you can relate to it or not. But I don't know, like just from the people I know and the people I talk to on a day-to-day basis, it's kind of interesting how I actually do really think that mental health and life struggles play a huge role in the kind of work you create. I think there is actually, in my mind at least, an interesting link there.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I definitely agree with you. I love the looks of some of these like liminal space background type things, like, Stanley Kubrick inspired shots. But I always wonder, like, what each person's individual take on it is.
I feel like that's why we need to talk to people more, I guess. That's why we need more community. We need to we don't need to, but it's nice to understand the person behind the work, because I feel like you just learn so much more about the imagery talking to the person. Like, for instance, like I never would have known that really interesting and very, crazy, and that's with due respect, like crazy backstory without having spoken to you. Like your images are beautiful and amazing, but like knowing you as a person, like that's super interesting, because that makes you think of like there's so many other things that I'd be interested to talk to you about that could be completely different conversations that got nothing to do with photography. I think it's kind of, in my mind, I feel like we all want to connect and communicate, but I think we're very good at not doing that.
I agree fully. I mean, I have a lot of things to say about a lot of things, and I love to listen and hear when other people talk. Uh, I think like your introvert extrovert question there. So I appear as introvert when I first meet people, especially a group of people that I don't know yet. It's not that I'm introverted; it's that I think it's really important for me to listen and kind of observe like all these different things about this person, because I'm only going to say something if I think it's something that will engage and go well with that person, whether it's a flat topic like talking about photos or beer, whiskey, whatever, and just like how they talk. I'll change the way I talk with my voice with different people, the way I talk on the phone with different people. Like it changes a lot. And sometimes one friend group is like, why do you change your voice when you talk to this person? It's like, sometimes you gotta, make sure you don't agitate someone. If I know someone comes from backgrounds where they, were yelled at or abused, I'm going to try and talk more softly than perhaps on the phone with someone who's trying to buy a house or something. Um, but yeah, when I talk and I start to engage with stuff, it's all about that. There's a lot of people I've known briefly, and I would imagine many of them would be surprised that I would remember the details I do. But anyone that I've ever spoken to at any point in my life, I remember so many details about that person, like personal details. Like when people open up and tell me things about themselves, I just don't forget it.
See, that's really fascinating, because I feel like that's really important. I feel like we live in a society where everything is very throwaway, even conversations. A
Yes.
lot of conversations are very shallow. They're very much about what can I gain from talking to this person, the transactional value of a conversation. I think that's kind of something that we've very much at this moment in time have given up for society. But I think that's really an interesting, just a really interesting trait you have, because I feel like I would say I'm similar. I don't know if I'd actually say I am the same, because I feel like I talk to so many people. I generally kind of keep track of what I say to people, let alone what other people say to me. But I think that just shows me that you're engaged and that you want to engage with people. It's not just a case of let's talk for the sake of talking. It's like let's actually understand people. And I like how you said that you like to listen, because I kind of feel like it makes sense. Like knowing a bit about your history, like it makes sense because obviously you're very observational. So therefore you're going to listen because you know how to step back and take the time to observe. So you know how to take the time to step back and listen as well, which is, I don't think it's a trait that we see a lot nowadays. I don't think, because everyone wants to be in the limelight. Everybody wants to be at the forefront. Everybody wants you to look at them. When actually, some people just do prefer to be in the background. That's also quite important. We need both sides.
Yeah, like I'll tell anyone anything about myself or any subject. Like I have a lot of things to say about a lot of things, but I'm only going to say them if I feel the other person is interested and cares what I have to say.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, I'm not going to talk your ear off for nothing. But I would definitely say you're one of those people, just not even based on the conversation or the things you do, but the way in which you speak and the way in which you reference other people you've talked to in those details. I would say you're definitely like one of those people. I imagine you probably also remember a lot of details from things, and I think quite a few photographers might actually be like that. And I mean, I think generally, like this is how humans used to be. I don't think most of us were so like obsessed with the spotlight and the attention. I feel like, when things really started to emerge, and like I'd say probably the 80s, when technology really started to kind of get a kickstart, more and more people like were trying to, get famous or, date someone who had like a nice car or, a nice job. And that just got like, it got less connection oriented and more spotlight and individually oriented. And, that catapulted. I was born in the 90s. So I remember going to school. Nobody had a phone until we got to like high school. And even then, like we had flip phones. I don't even think I saw a touchscreen phone until grade 12. And even then, it was like not an iPhone. Most people didn't have them back then. It was like Blackberries. But, like as like, Instagram and TikTok really kickstarted after I got out of high school, I feel like that just absolutely like fast forwarded everything a lot, because now it just feels like everyone is just doing whatever they can. You had asked a question about reels and stuff like that. So do you have anything you want to say before I go on about the reels?
Go right ahead.
Okay, so I do Super 8 because I'm weird. I like weird niche things. Like, if I buy something, I don't want to buy BMW 3 Series because almost everyone has one. I want to find something that's different. So with Super 8, it's different. It's unfortunately painfully expensive. It cost me $250 to produce a 3-minute and 30-second cartridge.
That's
I know
insane.
it's absurd.
That's insane.
It's absurd. I'm about to get a little bit of a grant from my province and the Atlantic filmmakers thing locally, so it's going to ease up the costs. But I do Super 8 because it's just like it's like a real old like throwback limiting thing. I don't do it for the reels. It actually looks terrible in reels because most of it's being cut off. The detail you get in the Super 8, it's best when it's oriented horizontally instead of vertically. And I really, really, really do not like the TikTok and reel trend for photos, because when someone posts a photo and I like it, like I have all the notifications on. So like I'll like stuff, but like when I really go back and browse, I'll go back on someone's profile and I'll browse and I'll scroll. But when I see something like a reel, it's like I need more than 3 seconds to look at your photo. I think it's like, I understand they have to do it to get the view. Like I understand why they do it. I don't judge them at all. But for me, it's like, your work is too good to be in a 3-second clip like that. Like I understand you have to do it, but like if you post something, I want to be able to go on your Instagram and properly look at it. Even Instagram, the low resolution is limiting. So like TikTok is just like, no, can't do it.
So I have so much to say from this. It's actually pretty funny. But I think the first thing I should probably say, or like the best place to start, would be like, you're right, because the problem with TikTok and Instagram is that it's flattened the experience of art. It's not it's not an experience anymore. It's just a thing we do to consume media and to waste time. Because let's not lie, the general public, for instance, are on Instagram just to waste time. They're standing in a queue. They're probably on the toilet or something. They're just literally scrolling on their phones mindlessly. They're not even paying attention to what they look at. And I think unless you're purposefully looking for art or looking for something to kind of inspire you, everything is very much throwaway. And it's funny, you should say you were born in the 90s. I was born in the 90s. I remember the day YouTube was around. I remember the very first day of YouTube, being at school. Everyone was on it. And me being like, what's this weird video software? And it's interesting because how old are you, by the way?
I turned 29 in like a week, 2 weeks. The 2nd of September, 2 weeks.
That's really funny because I am 29 currently. So that's really interesting. It's a funny age to be because you remember life before technology and you remember life after technology. Yeah. The thing about technology is interesting. Like I've lived not a whole of my life, but I've had at least a good 14, 15 years without technology, and I've had a good almost 15 years, I guess, with technology. I can honestly say I'm so glad that I'm not like 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 nowadays. I think technology has completely ruined the experience of childhood, and it's completely ruined just the human experience, full stop. I think it's so hard to have any kind of attention span nowadays. It's so hard to pull yourself out of the internet. Like, how do you do that? Because everything, even society as a whole, is now ingrained so deeply within the internet itself. And I kind of feel that's quite sad, which is why when people shoot film, which is why people shoot Super 8, which is why when people do stuff that seems very nostalgic and seems very physical, like that's why I think it's so important, because we have to remember that things digitally are great, but that's not the only way of living. People had careers before social media existed, for instance. It's not the only thing that matters.
Yeah, exactly. I think you brought up a really good word twice there. You said purpose twice, and I think that is anytime you open up your phone for anything, I think people should ask themselves, why are you opening up your phone? Are you opening up Instagram? Okay, what are you opening up Instagram for? Why do you have Instagram? What do you use it for? I think if you're using it to, look at fashion or look at your friends or look at photos, it should have a real purpose. Even if that purpose is just because you think something's funny and you want to go watch some funny videos to laugh, that's good for you. Or if you want to, I don't know, maybe there's a celebrity that you like, follow them. But I think a lot of people get into this rabbit hole where they follow, these celebrities, and it's just like it detaches them from like what humans are supposed to be like. Not that these celebrities are not humans, but what we see from these celebrities on these platforms is not good. And I think also that makes art much more difficult, because if you're trying to create art and you're competing with celebrities with huge platforms, I would probably urge most people to be very like selective about which famous people you follow and which brands you follow. Like if you follow a bunch of celebrities, try to unfollow, like try to cut that in half. Try and like make sure the ratio is more balanced on what you see when you open up your Instagram page, because it's probably also not good for someone's mental health when they're constantly being peppered with people that have droves of like money or looks or whatever. Because in small doses, sure, but if you're opening up something like that and then you're going to a 9 to 5, I think that just completely crushes any motivation, whether they realize it or not. I also think a lot of the dudes, and I know some of the photographer dudes do this because I'm nosy. I like to look at this stuff, but people got to stop following some of these Instagram models. I think it's really, really, really unhealthy. And another thing too, not to go on too many different topics here, but back to like the women in photography, I've spoken to quite a few women in photography about this, and the woman with film page, their big thing is they don't post selfies, and I think it's really important that they don't do that, because I find if you're a woman who's perceived as conventionally attractive and you have a lot of photos of yourself, the types of followers you're going to attract are sometimes going to reduce your value to how you look, even if you take excellent photos. And you're not really left with a choice, because to grow the following, you have to post those photos. And then women who feel that they are not attractive, even if they are, who don't post the photos, they don't get the same following, because Instagram prioritizes faces. That's why you see like the celebrities and stuff so much. But it's really hard to get a foothold in that field. And a lot of the women, they feel like they have to do this, and if they don't feel like they're attracted, they feel like their art's not worth what it is, because the likes and the numbers. And yeah, I think it's a very toxic social media environment we live in for a lot of days. And I think it subtly presents itself to artists and photographers regularly. And I think the best way to help each other out with that, whether you're a photographer or not a photographer, is to just try and cut back on the amount of your social media use that is used for things that are not intentional, and cut back on the celebrities and the ultra wealthy, or the models, the unattainables, if you will.
So again, there's so much I can say with that, because it opens up so many different topics, and these are definitely topics I'd love to talk to you about, like delve into further in the future, like for sure, because there's so much to talk about there. Like there's so much there's just so much to like,
Yeah,
there's just
half
so
of
much
that's
discourse
probably
and
not
just so,
even
yeah, just so
photo
much, there's
related.
just so much to open up. And there's just so many different tangents that you can go on, the different kind of ideas and thoughts and kind of like, important conversations to have as well. Like, that's the thing. But one thing I wanted to say, like, I think I don't want to tell people who to follow and who not to follow, but I would
Yeah, same.
ask people to think, why am I following this person? Like, why are celebrities important? And why do you want to spend your time, as I always say to myself, like, why do you want to spend your time watching somebody else live their life when you're not living yours? Like, don't be sold somebody else's dream when you could be taking the time to make your own happen. Like, it's so easy to watch somebody else and want what they have, but you're not in that position. That's not you. You have to remember you're only responsible for your life, not anybody else's. You can watch people drive around in fancy cars, have the nicest clothes, travel to the most exotic places. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to aspire to be like that, but you will never be that. And I think that's the distinction you have to make, it's particularly with something like photography, where you look at the idea of, like, somebody might have the best gear. Doesn't mean you're going to have the best gear. Somebody might be taking photos in a location you want to visit. Doesn't mean you'll ever get to visit that place. Like, for instance, Iceland would be an amazing place to go to. But it's also like, you can shoot great images around you. You don't have to go to fancy places to create great images. I used to really, really think that if I lived somewhere else, if I lived in America, for instance, my images would be great. I'd, be so much more popular and successful because American aesthetics are super fancy and all the rage. There's a huge trend for that. And there's just a huge kind of desire for that, I guess, really, which is something I definitely want to talk about later on for sure. But I'm kind of like, I think really it comes down to escapism. I think we all like to escape at the end of the day. Like, we're all trying to escape our own lives and kind of, it's weird. It's interesting for me. And I think you'd probably share the same sentiment because you're born at the same time. But it's like we all live two lives. We live one in real world and we live one online, and they don't connect whatsoever. You can be whoever you want to be online, but that still doesn't mean that you're not the same person you are when you're not. If that makes sense. I
Yeah,
don't know.
well, I also want to say everything that you just said after what I just said,
Yeah.
like that is literally the exact intention of what I said. Like, you took it exactly where I intended, like with the connection. But yeah, you're right. I mean, you're right. The
I think we have a very similar ways of looking at things, because I feel like I agree. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I think I personally do not care for celebrities. I'm not interested. I don't follow any celebrities. I'm just not interested, to be very honest. The people can live their lives however they want. But I just feel like being famous, I'd rather be known. See, I'd rather be famous for being, I'd rather be well known for impacting people in a positive way than be famous for nothing. I'm very lucky. Like, I don't find money to be the pinnacle of my value. The conversations I have are much more important than the money I make from the flying football, for instance. I hardly make any money from it. And that's fine, because for me and the way things are, like, that's not what it's about. It's about the conversations, about meeting people. It's about sharing great art. It's about talking to people. It's about, you know, there are things that are more important than money. And it's a shame we live in a society where money is kind of like the ultimate, which is, unhelpful for many people because they don't have that,
I think the money drives the fame too. Like, I think it's better to be respected. Like, if money was not a thing, would someone rather be respected or famous? Because the fame loses its value if it's not connected.
I think, like, for me, I think also, without going off too much of a tangent and without getting too personal, but like, I came from a very low income background. So the value of money to me is so different to people who may have had a different lifestyle. Like, I feel guilty about going on holiday because I'm like, that's money I could have saved, or that's money that, somebody else could have spent on food or whatever. But at the same time, it's like, you don't miss what you don't have. And if you're raised with not a lot of money, I think you kind of look at life very differently. Like, to me, of course, having money is nice. Of course, having fancy stuff is nice, but it's not necessary. It's necessary for your bills to be paid. It's necessary for you to have food. It's necessary for you to have a few small comforts of, like, going out and, like, being able to do photography, for instance, is a luxury. Like, it's not something that we need to do, but it's a luxury. And I don't know, I just wish people were just a little bit more grateful for the smaller things. I think too many people are invested in, this is a completely off topic, to say anything to do with photography, but this is cool. But it's kind of, people are so invested in just this idea of living in such a, just like a fancy way, or like, even stuff like Costa coffee. Like, you don't need Costa coffee, it's just not a
Mhm.
necessity. But we've become kind of desensitized that, like, oh, you must do this, you must do that. If you don't go on holiday every year, what's wrong with you? It's like, I've never been abroad, and I'm almost 30. I'm going to go abroad this year because I finally was like, okay, I need to go abroad. But when I tell people that, people are like, well, why not? Or how not? And it's like, do you not realize that costs money? Like,
I'm the same. I have not done any of it.
like you're lucky you had two parents who could afford to pay for you to go abroad. Like, I didn't have that when I grew up. People
Mhm.
forget not everybody lives the same way. Nobody has the same access to things, and it frustrates me sometimes because I know, like, there's people I know who are like 18, 19, and they have literally anything they want. And it's like, you don't understand how lucky you are because not everybody has that. And they'll moan because, like, this is so off topic, but it's fine. But they'll moan because, like, maybe, they couldn't go out with their friends or whatever, or like, they couldn't buy some designer goods or whatever. And it's like, you should be grateful that you have parents who are willing to pay that for you, who can pay that for you. Hey, like, how you're lucky that you have parents that have a job, because if you're in a situation your parents didn't have a job, they're not something you'd ever have or be able to attain. So I just feel like people need to remember, like, not everybody has the same access to things. And sorry, this is very off topic, but it's kind of like, I don't know. I just wish people were a little bit more. I don't know. I just wish people were a bit more caring. They weren't so wrapped up in themselves, but they have to remember that everybody else also does exist. Because, as you said earlier, we are definitely at a point, and it especially affects the arts as well. That it's all like, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. It's all very about attention, and it's like, it's not all about attention. It's also about giving back. You have to also, I don't know. You have to also be, I don't know. Okay, I don't want to go with that. Anyway, ignore that. Scrap that. I don't know where I'm going with that. But I don't know. It's something I'm passionate about. I just don't like people who moan about stuff that doesn't matter. You
I
know?
think all that stuff does relate to photography. I feel like none of us make enough money to really have the freedom to appreciate the
Mm.
things in art as much as we probably would otherwise.
That's true. But then I also feel like, but if you did have the money, would you spend it?
Oh yeah, it's the other thing. I mean, I feel like a lot of people would rather spend that money on like a Balenciaga sweater with a bunch of holes in it. But ultimately, I think like every person I know that has the money to like buy everything they need,
Yeah.
like these people. I know people, for example, they own really really nice watches. They have really nice BMW, but they're not buying like they could go and buy a Ferrari, but instead they have a bunch of art pieces. So
Yeah.
those people are out there. And I think there's like a certain threshold. Once people have like the things that they really, really want, that they feel good about, then they'll start buying art. But unfortunately, even if you have a low threshold, it's hard to meet that these days. Like a lot of
Yeah.
people would buy art if they could just afford to pay their rents and some food and buy some clothes they want.
Yeah. 100%. Like, 1,000% agree with that. And I think it's kind of funny how it's a slightly off topic, but it's also something that somebody posted ages ago on their stories that I saw, and I actually screenshot it. But it was a tweet from somebody, I don't know who the person was, but they're saying how it's funny that people who are rich that don't need to actually worry about money would always turn to art as a form of making more money. Like, it's funny how, like, the thing about artists, like, there's three things you need to be a successful artist, in my opinion, and that is time, space, and money. It's like, if you lack one of those things, you won't be able to reach the full potential of your work. And I think it's a shame that there isn't more funding for artists, and it's a shame that there aren't more opportunities for artists, especially photographers. I think photography
It's
is
such a
very
good
much,
quote.
huh?
Just before that quote gets lost, like that was a great quote that you just said. The
Okay.
thing that photographers need: time, money, and space. Fuck, that was good.
It's just an observation, I guess, more than anything that I've kind of come to, because I talk to a lot of artists. I kind of, I even just in myself, and the thing, it's funny because it's like, you look at a camera and it's like £3,000, and you think to yourself, cool, when I have £3,000, I'll buy that. But like, when you have £3,000, you don't buy that because you've got other things to spend that money on. It's kind of like, just, I don't know. It's weird because it's like, you can have, I don't know if this is a good thing to say or not, but I feel like, I don't know. Okay, right. Yeah, I'm going to go on a ramble about something that we don't need to talk about right now. Um, Anyway, let's get back into your work. I do apologize. So, actually, okay, so talking about, or at least kind of jumping off the discussion of the idea of reality and the idea of kind of escapism, especially, like, do you consider your work to be an exploration or escapism?
Sometimes it's escapism for sure. If I'm going through a stressful day or not feeling great, usually I can't shoot if I'm not feeling great. But if I'm stressed and I force myself to go out, it's escapism. Now, probably not a super popular thing to say, but usually I will smoke quite a bit of weed, and if I have to drive, I obviously won't really do that. But usually someone else will drive, in which case I'll also drink as well. I'm not addicted to anything though. It's like I always like if I smoke weed 3-4 days in a row, I will not do it 3-4 days in a row. Same with drinking. Like I'm fortunate I don't get addicted, but I use that because it just helps me like unwind a little bit, just relax a little bit. Because my lifestyle is too stressful right now to really. I mean, I didn't shoot at all in the month of August. I almost quit photography in August. That's why I had everything archived. Yeah.
Oh, is that why?
It was just like one thing after another. Whether it was like a work stressor, a finance stressor, and it just all that stuff just kept piling on. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna archive everything. I'm gonna stop using social media for a bit, and we'll see what happens.
So you live in Canada, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting because I actually assumed very stupidly, well, not very stupidly, but probably very sillily. Is that a word? I don't know. But I assumed you were from America because your work has a particularly, or at least a kind of American aesthetic, if you understand what I mean. And I'm kind of curious as kind of like what your thoughts are on that, because there is a huge fascination with the American dream and the idea of America being this very fascinating, wide open place of fantasy, I guess you could say. And kind of like, what do you think about that? And is that something you actually care for and to present in your work?
Yeah, so definitely have that same sort of like, south of the border, but I've never been to the US. The US I find fascinating. I'd love to go through the US and shoot a lot. And not just places like California or New York. I mean, I want to shoot or Chicago. I want to shoot random towns in Wisconsin, random towns in Arkansas. Like, I want to see like all of it, because that's the other thing. Like, you go to the US, all the cool stuff has been shot basically 1,000 times.
Yeah.
So, it'd be cool to go there with like, a set of eyes from someone who doesn't live there and try and find something. Same with one of those people where I live. But locally, I mean, I think what makes Canada cool to shoot, at least where I live, is probably the wildlife. Like if you're a wildlife photographer and you haven't been to New Brunswick, you're missing out on probably the best hidden gem. Our landscapes too are absolutely killer, and a very short drive. I mean, that's the other thing. New Brunswick, you can drive 8 hours and still be in New Brunswick. Like that's how big our province is. Like if you want to drive from the north to the south, it's like a 12-hour drive. Meanwhile, I can drive 2 hours to the east and get to a place called Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia has something called the Cabot Trail. A lot of excellent photographers in Nova Scotia as well. PEI is another one. PEI is kind of interesting. I'll get into that. But Nova Scotia is really, really cool if you're a wildlife photographer, landscape photographer, and you haven't been to Canada. You got to go to New Brunswick. You got to check out Fundy. You got to check out St. Andrews. All those places. And then you also want to check out Nova Scotia for the Cabot Trail. But I wouldn't rule out PEI because PEI is less than an hour and a half away from me. You take a bridge, you go over, it's called the Confederation Bridge, nothing to do with the US. You go over there and then it's just a small little island. You can drive around the entire island in a day. It's mostly farming and agriculture. They've got some pretty good photographers there too, but it's just a very unique, different, and minimalist type landscape. So if someone's into minimalist photography, whether you're doing color, black and white, PEI in the summer, or I don't know much about farming, but whenever the crops get cool, definitely a cool place to visit.
See, that's fascinating. It takes 12 hours because I always forget how small the UK is compared to places such as America and Canada. Because here, like, I don't even know how long it would take you to drive from one end of England to the other, but it won't take that long. If I drive 2 hours, I'd have gone through so many different cities. It's insane. Like that just makes no sense to me. Like how you can, it's like Texas, for instance, like 4 hours in Texas driving, you're still in Texas. It makes no sense. Like that's insane. Just the vastness is insane. And it's actually really funny because I was talking to an American artist called Trills a couple weeks ago, actually. I said to him, I don't know if people are aware, but here in the UK, it's cheaper for me to get a flight to Europe than it is to get on a train to go somewhere else in the UK.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I could literally go. The price for me to get to Toronto is at best $300. $700 I can get to Scotland.
It's insane. Like, it's absolutely insane. It's bizarre. So it's just like, if I want to get on the train to Devon, it's going to cost like 300 quid. Like, either way, it's like 300 quid, 200 quid. If I want to get on a plane to Spain, 50 quid maybe. And it's just like, that makes no sense whatsoever. And it's weird, because one thing I would love to do in the future, because I don't drive because I'm an idiot, is I would love to tour the UK and just take pictures around the UK in different places. But I'm going to have to save a lot of money to do that. That's going to be expensive. Actually, it would be cheaper for me to literally fly over to America and travel around America. It would probably be cheaper than it would be to do it in the own country that I live in, which is pretty funny.
The timing will work out well, though. I mean, you'll probably meet some pretty cool people by the time you get to the point where you're doing the traveling, where the traveling will be way better because you'll be able to meet up with all the different people.
So what is interesting that I actually really want to do in it, well, there's two things I really want to do in a few years. Actually, there's quite a lot of things I want to do in a few years. I have a lot of really cool plans for the future. But one thing I would love to do is go down to Oregon in America, because I know a lot of photographers from Oregon who live close to each other but never meet up, which makes no sense to me. I'm just like, why would you not do that if you literally live within 20 minutes drive from each other and you all have cars? That makes no sense. But I'd love to go down there because, like, the sense of community there is so good. And also, I'd love to create a photo book. I've said this, I think I've said this publicly. If I don't, I have said it publicly. So in the next 3 years or so, I really want to create like a photo book for photographers, because I meet a lot of photographers. I know a lot of photographers, and one thing everybody wants is their work in print, but they can't always afford to have their work in print. Not everyone can afford to have a book published of their work. So I was like, well, why don't I just create a photo book with everybody's work in, have like some kind of annual or something. So it has everybody's work together. Like, that could be really cool. You know, something I'm thinking about is, I don't know when I'm going to do it. I don't know how much it's going to cost. I have no experience with any of that kind of stuff. So it's something I really want to work towards. So I think it'd be really great. It'd be a great way for me to get back to the people I've spoken to, yourself, for instance, or just, you know, people who want to have their work published. I think it should be a fun experience, I think. I don't know. If that's something you'll be interested in the future, let me know and I'll put your work into it. I don't know. I like this idea of, as I mentioned earlier, and as we've spoke about previously, like, just the idea of bringing stuff into the physical world from the digital space. Because I think it's important to remember that having your work physically and having things in your hand is also important as just having your work online. You know, I think it's so easy just to give yourself over to the algorithm. I think it's very easy to do that, you know. Anyways, so your Dead More series. That concludes the first part of my conversation with photographer Ryan Taylor. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions or comments about it, please send me an email at theflyingfruitbowl@gmail.com, or please get in touch via social media sites such as Instagram and Twitter. The Flying Fruit Bowl podcast can now be found on a variety of sites such as Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube. If you like the show, please consider rating, reviewing, sharing, or subscribing on any of those platforms to help spread the word and garner more attention. Also, please don't forget to check out theflyingfruitbowl.co.uk for daily inspiration and written interviews. And if you're a creative, please get in touch for a chance to be featured or interviewed. We now also have a Patreon page if you'd like to support the platform further. Tiers start from £1, and more information can be found over at patreon.com/theflyingfruitbowl. Additionally, we also have a PayPal if monthly donations are not your thing. If you'd like to donate to the Flying Fruit Bowl, I should include a link to our PayPal in the show notes. Once again, thank you very much for listening to the episode today. Until next time, folks, please stay safe.